Ethan's phone rang as he was reviewing reports in his home office. He frowned when he saw David's name on the screen. It was rare for his friend to call at this hour. Sighing, he answered, "Ethan, dude, where did you find this girl?" David's excited voice echoed on the other end. "What girl?" Ethan replied, confused. "The singer, the one who performed at your restaurant today." Ethan leaned back in his chair, squinting. "David, what are you talking about? I hired a pianist for tonight." "Yeah, but when I got there, it was this girl singing. Her voice, man, it's out of this world. I've never heard anything like it." Ethan straightened, feeling a twinge of unease. "Are you saying someone sang in my restaurant without my permission?" "I don't know the details, but you need to hear this girl. Her voice is one of a kind, Ethan. I even wanted to reserve a table for when she performs again." The restaurant owner rubbed his face, trying to process the situation. He had been swamped with work for days and had no idea what was going on in his own business. "That doesn't make sense, but I'll be right there." "Great. And Ethan, get ready for a surprise." Hanging up the phone, he grabbed his car keys and left the house, his mind buzzing with questions. Who was this mysterious girl? And why did her voice seem to stir up so much emotion in David? Ethan drove to the restaurant with his mind full of questions. The light rain made the streets wet and reflected the city lights like a colorful mosaic. He parked in front of his establishment and, as he got out of the car, took a deep breath. The restaurant was bustling, as usual. Through the large glass windows, he saw smiling customers, hurried waiters, and a vibrant energy filling the room. But something was different tonight. As soon as he walked in, he was greeted by the delicious smell of freshly prepared food and the soft sound of a melody. A sweet, captivating voice echoed through the room, enveloping the customers in an almost magical atmosphere. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew that feeling, but he didn't know exactly why. He looked around and saw his manager, Noah, near the bar. Without wasting time, he went to him. "Noah, what's going on here?" he asked in a firm tone. Noah's eyes widened, surprised to see his boss there. "Ethan, you here? I thought you were busy with reports." "And you were, until I got a call saying my restaurant has a new singer." "Care to explain?" The manager scratched the back of his neck and looked towards the small stage in the corner of the room. There she was, a young woman with disheveled hair, wearing simple, slightly baggy clothes. But when she opened her mouth to sing, she completely transformed. Her voice was like a warm hug, full of emotion and a rare beauty. "That's Grace," Noah said, almost in a whisper. Ethan stood still, just listening. The melody seemed to trigger something in his memory, as if he had heard it before, a long time ago. He couldn't take his eyes off the mysterious young woman on stage. "Where did she come from?" he asked, never taking his eyes off her. Noah hesitated before answering. "She was singing on the street, near the entrance. Sarah saw her and brought her in. We told her she could sing for tips." Ethan didn't answer right away. He just watched. Something about this girl seemed different. It wasn't just her voice. It was something deeper, something he couldn't quite understand yet. But he was about to find out. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off the girl on stage. Every note she sang seemed to penetrate deep into his soul. There was genuine emotion in her voice, as if each word carried a story. He felt a tightness in his chest, a feeling he couldn't explain. When the song came to an end, silence fell over the restaurant for a moment. Then, as if a spell had been broken, the audience erupted in applause. Some people stood up to place money in front of the stage. Others just smiled, delighted by the unexpected performance. Grace bowed her head shyly, thanking him. Ethan took a deep breath and turned to Noah. "I want to talk to her. Now." Noah nodded and walked to the stage while Ethan headed to a more private table. A few minutes later, Sarah appeared with Grace at her side. Up close, he noticed that the young woman looked more fragile than he had imagined. Her eyes were deep-set, and her face was traced with weariness, as if life had been hard on her. "Are you the owner of the restaurant?" she asked, in a tone of respect, but without showing any fear. Ethan nodded. "Yes, and your Grace, right?" She nodded. "I heard you were singing on the street. How did you end up here?" Grace glanced quickly at Sarah, who smiled slightly, encouraging her to speak. "I sing on the streets to try to earn some money. Sarah saw me and said maybe I could sing here." Ethan looked at Sarah, who gave him a small smile and said, "She is talent, Ethan. A rare talent. I just thought she deserved a chance." Ethan was silent for a few seconds. Then he looked back at Grace. "You sing very well. Where did you learn?" She hesitated for a moment before answering. "My mother taught me." Those words made Ethan's stomach turn. He felt a lump in his throat, not understanding exactly why. "Your mother, is she a singer?" Grace shook her head. "She used to sing for me when I was little, but it was a long time ago." Ethan swallowed hard. There was something about this girl that bothered him deeply, as if a piece of his past was coming back without warning. But he didn't know what it was yet, and he was about to find out. Ethan crossed his arms, analyzing every detail of the young woman in front of him. Grace seemed shy, but at the same time, there was something about her that made her special. Her voice still echoed in his mind, bringing with it a sense of unease he couldn't explain. "And you sing like that without ever having taken lessons?" he asked, still trying to comprehend the situation. Grace nodded. "I only heard my mother sing when I was little. I learned from her, but I never really performed." Ethan watched for a moment, then looked at Noah and Sarah. "Can she sing again?" Sarah smiled and nodded. "Of course, if she wants to." Grace hesitated. She seemed surprised by the request, as if she had never expected such an opportunity. But then she took a deep breath and nodded. "I can try." Sarah led Grace back to the stage, where a small microphone was set up for her. The restaurant's pianist, who had been watching until then, offered to accompany her. Ethan sat down and crossed his arms, watching intently. The room fell silent as the first notes began to play, and then Grace began to sing. Her voice was even more powerful than before. There was something pure, almost magical, in the way she interpreted each word. The melody seemed to fill every corner of the restaurant, capturing everyone's attention. Some customers stopped eating to listen to it. Others closed their eyes, as if transported to another place. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He knew this feeling. But where did it come from? When the song ended, the restaurant erupted in applause. Grace seemed surprised by the reaction. Some customers even stood up to leave money near the stage. Sarah and Noah smiled at her proud. Ethan, however, did not applaud. He was paralyzed. His heart was beating fast, and his mind was spinning. He knew this melody. He had heard this voice before, and in that moment, he knew he had to find out where it came from. The restaurant was still vibrating with the enthusiastic applause of the audience, but Ethan could not join in the euphoria. He remained still, his eyes fixed on Grace, trying to understand why that voice moved him so much. Her heart was beating fast, as if it was trying to warn him of something that her mind couldn't yet decipher. "I've heard that voice before." Grace stepped off the stage and walked back to the table where Sarah and Noah were sitting. Her face lit up with happiness, but also with surprise. "I didn't expect that reaction," she murmured, smiling slightly. Sarah touched her arm affectionately. "You're amazing, Grace. People felt that. You have a rare gift." Ethan cleared his throat, catching everyone's attention at the table. "That song you sang, did you write it yourself?" Grace hesitated for a moment before answering. "No. My mom used to sing it to me when I was little." The air seemed to leave Ethan's lungs. His stomach churned, and he leaned forward a little. Your mom, did she write songs? Grace nodded. Yes, at least I think so. I've never heard anyone else sing them. They were hers alone. Noah and Sarah exchanged a look, not understanding the shock on Ethan's face. He swallowed hard. What's her name? Grace blinked a few times, confused by the question. Hannah. The name hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. He felt his body stiffen. The voices around the restaurant grew distant, as if he were sinking into a memory he had been trying to bury for years. Hannah, the woman he had never forgotten. And then, like a movie playing before his eyes, it all came back. The past he thought he had left behind, and the shocking possibility he never would have imagined. Grace could be his daughter. Ethan felt a lump tighten in his throat. The name Hannah brought back a flood of memories he had thought were buried. The restaurant around him seemed to disappear as his mind went back years. He had been lost, alone on an unfamiliar road, after an accident in the snow. He remembered the bitter cold, the pain in his tired muscles, and how his vision had blurred. Before passing out, when he woke up, he was lying in a simple cabin with the soft scent of herbs in the air. Hannah was there, caring for him, applying warm compresses to his bruised body. She was young, but she had a wise look, full of kindness. As the days passed, Ethan recovered, and in that time, something unexpected happened. He fell in love. Hannah was different from all the women he had ever known. Simple, but with a strength that captivated him. She sang to him at night, while the icy wind howled outside. Her voice was soft, enveloping, and her songs unique. He promised he would come back for her, but he never did. City life, business, responsibilities, everything dragged him away from that winter, and Hannah became just a distant memory. Now, sitting there, facing Grace, the young woman with that familiar, soulful voice, Ethan felt his breath hitch. He needed to know the truth. Swallowing hard, he looked directly into Grace's eyes. Your mother, where is she now? His voice was shakier than he would have liked. Grace looked down, fidgeting with her fingers nervously. She's sick. In the city hospital. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Hannah was alive, and he needed to see her. Ethan's heart raced. Hannah was alive. Grace's words echoed in his mind, scrambling his thoughts. He had moved on with his life, built an empire, but now he found himself paralyzed by something he had never imagined. The past had found him again. He took a deep breath, trying to maintain his composure. How long has she been in the hospital? He asked, his voice lower than he intended. Grace sighed. A few weeks. The doctor said the treatment is expensive. We've been trying to keep up with the expenses, but it's been hard. She looked away, as if she didn't want to admit what she was going through. Ethan felt a pang of guilt. He was sitting here, owning one of the most successful restaurants in the city, while Hannah and Grace struggled to survive. What's wrong with her? Grace hesitated. They think it's something in her heart. They need tests, but without the money, the young woman shrugged, as if she had already resigned herself to the worst. Ethan clenched his fists. He couldn't let Hannah suffer. Not after everything. He stood up abruptly. Let's go there. Now. Grace blinked in surprise. What? To the hospital. I want to see your mother. But why? Grace looked at him suspiciously, trying to understand why a man like Ethan Carter, owner of a luxury restaurant, would care about her mother. He stared at the young woman, feeling the truth about to explode from within him. But it wasn't time yet. Because I can help. Grace hesitated for a second, but then nodded. Okay. Ethan grabbed his car keys and hurriedly walked out of the restaurant. His mind was spinning with questions. He needed to see Hannah with his own eyes. And deep down, he already knew the answer to the question that was hammering at his mind. Grace was his daughter, and he needed to make amends for the past. Ethan drove in silence, his thoughts a whirlwind. Grace stood beside him, watching the road, still wary. The public hospital was only a few minutes away, but to him, it felt like an eternity. When they arrived, the gray, worn-down building made him swallow hard. He parked quickly and got out of the car. Grace hesitated before following him. She might be sleeping, she murmured. Ethan nodded but kept walking. He needed to see her. As they entered the hospital, a strong smell of disinfectant filled the air. People on stretchers, doctors rushing by, nurses rushing about. It all seemed a blur in his mind. Grace led him through the hallways until they stopped in front of a half-open door. She's here. Ethan felt his heart stop for a second. He took a deep breath and pushed open the door. Hannah was lying on the bed, looking more fragile than he had ever imagined. Her face was pale, and strands of hair fell across her sweaty forehead. Her eyes were closed, as if she were fast asleep. He took a step inside, but hesitated. Suddenly she stirred. Her eyes slowly opened, trying to focus on the figure standing before her. When Hannah's gaze met his, time seemed to stand still. For a few seconds, no one spoke. Ethan's breathing became heavy. The memory of the last time he'd seen her hit him hard. The winter, the cabin, the promises he'd never kept. Then her lips moved, and her voice came out weak but clear. Ethan? His chest tightened. Yes, Hannah, it's me. Her eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth to say something, but coughed, too weak. Grace rushed to her, taking her hand. Mom, it's okay. I'm here. Hannah looked at her daughter, then back at Ethan. A silent understanding dawned in her eyes. She knew. Ethan didn't have to say anything. The truth was there, wide open. You're back, Hannah whispered, her voice breaking. And at that moment, Ethan knew he should never have left. Ethan felt a lump in his throat when he heard Hannah's words. You're back, but he knew the truth was different. He took too long to come back. Hannah tried to sit up a little in bed, but she was too weak. Her eyes, despite her tiredness, carried a mixture of surprise, pain, and something he couldn't define. Grace held her mother's hand, looking at Ethan suspiciously. What's going on? How do you two know each other? The silence in the room became unbearable. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. But before he could say anything, Hannah broke the silence. Grace, this is your father. Grace blinked a few times, not understanding. What? Her voice came out almost as a whisper. Yes, honey, Hannah said with a slight sad smile. Ethan, he didn't know. I never told him. Grace took a step back, as if shocked. Is this some kind of joke? It can't be true. Ethan's heart sank. Grace, he started to speak, but she held up her hand, cutting him off. No, you can't just show up here out of nowhere and say you're my father. That doesn't make sense. Where have you been all this time? Her words were like knives to his chest. I didn't know, he admitted, feeling like the guiltiest man in the world. If I had known, I would never have left you. Grace looked at her mother, expecting her to deny everything. But Hannah just nodded, confirming her story. I didn't want to mess up your life, Ethan. You had big dreams. And by the time I realized you were pregnant, you were already gone. Ethan felt his eyes burn. If he had known he had a daughter, nothing in the world would have stopped him from staying. But right now, what mattered wasn't the past. It was the present. He looked at Grace, who was still trying to process everything. I know I can't change what happened, but I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere anymore. Grace bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears. But the hurt was there, visible in her eyes. I don't know if I can believe this. Ethan sighed, feeling helpless. He had wasted too much time. Now, all he could do was fight to get his family back. The silence in the room was heavy. Grace stared at Ethan, her eyes filled with confusion and pain. He wanted to say more, wanted to promise that he would stay, that he would make it right this time. but he knew that words wouldn't be enough. It was Hannah who broke the silence first. "He's telling the truth, Grace." Her voice was weak, but full of tenderness. "I know it took him a while, but he knows now. And he's here." Grace looked away. "It doesn't erase the years we were alone." Ethan felt the weight of those words, but he didn't back down. "I know, and I'll never be able to make up for that time. But I could do better from now on." Grace crossed her arms, her eyes full of hurt. "And what do you want? For me to simply accept you as my father after all this?" Ethan took a deep breath. "No, I want you to give me a chance to prove that I am." Hannah watched the exchange with an understanding look. Then she squeezed her daughter's hand and said softly, "I taught you to forgive, Grace. You have a big heart. I know you're hurt, but hold on to too much hurt, and it will only keep you from happiness." Grace blinked a few times, trying to hold back the tears. Ethan could tell she was fighting something inside herself. It was then that Hannah smiled and looked at Ethan. "You've always loved music," she murmured. "And now, your daughter has inherited that from you." Those words echoed in Ethan's mind. He looked at Grace, and for the first time, he saw himself in her. Grace sighed deeply, as if making a difficult decision. "I don't know if I'm ready to call you Dad." Her voice was hesitant. "But maybe I can get to know you first." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest, but this time it was different. It was hope. He nodded slowly. "That already means a lot to me." Grace still looked uncertain, but something about her changed. For the first time, she smiled a little. That night, Ethan arranged for Hannah to be transferred to a private hospital. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. And a few weeks later, when Grace took the stage at the restaurant and sang again, Ethan was there in the front row, proud. He couldn't change the past, but he was determined to be a part of its future.